Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to refer to an article written by a former Conservative MEP about what he sees as the common misunderstandings during the Brexit negotiations between both the British government and the EU, and wonder if Michel Barnier and EU officials really did have Boris Johnson pegged all wrong. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So very recently I was referring to Michel Barnier's obvious frustration with the Brexit negotiations and said that I felt that this frustration was probably down to the fact that he was having to put up with all this crap rather than the frustration born of surprise at how things have gone. After all, Boris Johnson doesn't do detail. We know this. He doesn't read his briefs. He also doesn't listen to anyone who puts a dampener on his ideas. We've known this for years. He's only interested in what he calls positive people. If only you believe hard enough, you can do anything. This is why he has never achieved anything of concrete value in his life. I suspect he grew up watching a lot of Disney films. It was also obvious to me, being British and observing politics in this country, and have been for some time, that Boris Johnson would simply not be allowed to negotiate a deal in line with his promises in the withdrawal agreement, because he'd won the December general election by specifically excluding moderates in the party. They weren't allowed to stand as candidates. They had to back his position. So any moderates that may actually exist in the Conservative Parliamentary Party right now are those who lied. But nonetheless, publicly, they had to make that lie. But what that means is that the Conservative Party, Parliamentary Party, has a much higher proportion of hardline MPs now than it did before. Also, the sheer number of new Conservative MPs, over 100, means you've also got a large number of Conservative MPs who are going to be very volatile because they have no idea about anything to do with Brexit. They didn't live through Brexit during the past few years of parliamentary wrangling. They don't really know what it's about. I'll bet you not one of them's read a single EU treaty. And they'll not be at all concerned about pursuing a hard Brexit. They won't see the problem. And this is why Boris Johnson moved some things from the legally binding portion of the withdrawal agreement. Because I'll remind you, there are two parts to the withdrawal agreement. There's the legally binding portion that is now signed into British and international law. And then there's the political declaration. These were just promises with their crossed fingers behind the old back. Not legally binding promises, just political promises. Now, why would Boris Johnson have moved things from the legally binding portion to the political declaration if he intended to keep all of the promises in the withdrawal agreement? Now all of this has led to the notion that Johnson was inevitably going to play silly buggers during the negotiations, and that we would make no progress at all for most of the duration. If I knew this, I reasoned, then surely Barnier knows this as well. But I could be wrong. I may be wrong about that, because a former Conservative MEP, Brendan Donnelly, wrote a piece last week, which I'll link in the description below. And it's quite interesting to read various bits of it. And in it, as a little aside, he also said that he does not believe that a no deal would be the result of misconceptions on both sides, but rather the fact that there's insufficient common ground between the two sides. Now, what that is to say is that what Brexiteers demand is completely incompatible with what the EU would insist upon. Now, my view is that this is certainly the case in noting why a comprehensive trade deal was never going to be possible. At no point have I ever believed that could be possible. But I don't see that as an explanation for an actual no deal happening. Because it is possible to get some sort of deal, little better than no deal, sure. I still see, if we end up with actually no deal, I see that as a miscalculation on the part of Boris Johnson. If that happens, we do not yet know if that will happen. But the part of his article that mainly caught my eye, there were two little lines in it really, to do with these misconceptions. Was one where he supposed that the EU considered that the British government would eventually take a rational approach. And also a part where he regarded that some in the Conservative Party saw Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement last autumn as the EU backing down. Sorry, voice going. Now, if true, then these twin perceptions on either side will be an absolute cocktail for disaster, because the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson pretended to negotiate last year was a complete capitulation on the part of his government. Now, it is true, it's very evident that some Brexit supporters saw it as a win, and the reason they saw that is because from their point of view, they were just being told all the way through last year, the EU insist on the backstop being adopted. The issue was always about the backstop. Everyone made it about the backstop. So, you know, there is no deal if you don't agree to the backstop, was the daily diet. So any agreement would have to have the backstop involved. Then Boris Johnson agreed something with the EU that did not include the backstop. Said the Brexit supporters, the EU backed down. But to see that as the EU backing down is to completely fail to understand what the backstop even was. It was there to ensure that there would always be that invisible border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, even when customs arrangements diverged. Now, what Boris Johnson's agreement did was to ensure that Northern Ireland would never diverge from EU customs arrangements. And instead what he did is he put the customs border inside the United Kingdom. Now, that was a massive win for the EU, because it was far preferable to them than the backstop. This was better than the backstop, because the backstop was always going to be messier than the Northern Ireland Protocol as it is now, from their point of view. Now, if those with power over Johnson believe that the EU backed down, and of course if they believed it then, they'll believe that they'll do it again, then that is to set themselves on a path to that accidental no deal this autumn, because they're going to get a very, very rude awakening. But then there's the perception on the other side. So let's say it does exist. Let us say, and I suppose a former MEP is going to have a better idea than I do, because they'll have spoken to some of these officials potentially personally. I haven't. I can just witness things from afar. Now, if the EU think that the British position is all just sabre rattling and that the government will be pragmatic in the end, that is to completely misunderstand what Boris Johnson is. Because if they are thinking that a no-deal Brexit will be so damaging to the UK that it will force Johnson to act if he's put into the position where either you do something or you're going to end up with no deal, they are making a horrendous mistake that someone like me cannot possibly understand why they'd be so deluded. This is why I've never really allowed it to entertain my thoughts, because Boris Johnson doesn't give a rat's arse for the UK or its economic or political future. He cares only about being Prime Minister and feeding his own self-importance. And, you know, the only way to get him to budge on Brexit is not to persuade him of how damaging to the country it will be to do otherwise. It's to persuade him that doing otherwise will hurt his own personal political power. No scope at all in pointing out the damage to the country. But even then, that won't be enough. Boris Johnson does not alone dictate the course of Brexit. He is following, to a certain extent, the lead of those who have power over him. And this comes in two parts. One, the major donors to the Conservative Party. He cannot risk them cutting off their supply of funds, as they did towards the end with Theresa May. The Conservatives were running out of money then. They were actually running out of money. If that happens under Boris Johnson, he's going to be forced out, just as Theresa May was. All there is to it. But then there's his backbench MPs who could, still force him out. Because Boris Johnson has created a situation where even looking like making a concession to the EU will have much of his parliamentary party baying for blood. They will oppose any settlement in Parliament that does this. And Boris Johnson will not attempt to push it through, even if he could, because he won't try and get it through on opposition votes, because if he did that, he would split his party. Theresa May had the option of getting a form of Brexit through that would have had opposition votes. She didn't do so because she didn't want to split the party. If he does that, he will end his leadership there and then. And all of this is evident. And I cannot see how anyone closely involved in matters, even in the EU, cannot see what's apparent to me. So it could look like, maybe, I still find it difficult to believe, that there are, perceptions on both sides that the other will move towards something more reasonable, as each side would characterise it. at the last minute, because both would be basing this perception on a misunderstanding of the other side. Then both sides would be wrong, and there's your accidental no deal. But what I would point out is, if this misconception does exist amongst EU officials, I don't need to waste too much time really trying to think how plausible it is, because it actually doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Because like Donnelly noted in his article, there is insufficient common ground between the Brexiteers and the EU. So ask yourself this. Let us say that the EU have this misconception, but let us say that they didn't. Let us say right from the start that they understood Boris Johnson. They understood the Conservatives, and they understood Brexit from the Conservatives' point of view, as I have. What could they have done differently? The answer is nothing. Not even not a lot. Actually nothing. Because the situation really is very simple. All the EU need, all they're demanding really, is for the UK to have access to their markets on worse terms than we did as members. And it's fine. And that's obvious, isn't it? Why would anyone, in any context, accept the obligations of a membership to any organisation if non-members had access to the same benefits without those obligations? You wouldn't. That's all Boris Johnson's team had to work on to get a deal. How do we make sure that our deal is worse than that of being an EU member? That was it. It's all you had to achieve. But we didn't even discuss that. The result of the UK team either not intending to get a deal or not understanding just how simple the concept of a deal was, even if the actual result would have been complex. I'm not saying it would have been easy to get a deal. I'm sure it would have been very complex, very difficult negotiations. But the concept was simple. And because we haven't even started discussing that very simple concept, which is the core of Brexit, there is no way that we can now get a mutually beneficial deal. The best we can hope for is a deal that knocks out a load of tariffs. And even then, I'm quite certain that if we did get that, it would still favour the EU over the UK. They would still get the better deal. They always will. But even that's not certain. So the misconception that matters to me is undoubtedly that which exists on the Conservative Brexiteer side. Because if we're where we are because Brexiteers think the EU will back down, not compromise, because compromise of course would happen, but actually back down, then we could have taken a different path if that nonsense had been knocked on the head from the start. So if Brexiteers were in the Conservative Party convinced that the EU would never back down on certain issues, they'd compromise. Like the EU have said, we don't have to follow all their rules. We just need to follow enough that, again, that deal is not as good as the deal for a member. That's all they're asking for. And if they'd have just pursued that, of course it would have been a different outcome. Not that we know exactly what the outcome is going to be. But those are my thoughts anyway. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.